Hi, everybody. I'm going to try and do a video. You all know how I am with technology, so bear with me. First, I want to start by saying I sure do miss you guys. And I hope you're staying safe and staying healthy. This video is not required. Everything you really need for this unit is in your paper packet. And I will try as much as I can to make sure that's always the case. It's harder for people like Miss Houston and Miss Adams who teach basically computer classes. But in the English department, we've been using tools from the 15th century since time immemorial, and I will keep it that way as much as I can because I know some of you don't have Wi-Fi and you don't have unlimited data on your phones. But if you're like me and you are an auditory learner, I learn much better from listening to people talk than I do from trying to read and process that way. So if you're like me and it helps you to listen to somebody speaking, then I got you back, boo. But everything you really need is in your paper packet. And it can be done on your own paper. You don't need a printer. And it can be turned in at the school, or it can be turned into the bus drivers, or anything like that. So, let's get started. I'm gonna do this in one take. I want to keep it as much like it would be in the actual classroom as I can. So that means I'm probably going to hem and haw and stammer, but I do that in class. So at least it will feel normal to you to laugh at me. For this week, we'll be reading 2 stories and writing 2 paragraphs. One of those stories is a later story by F. Scott Fitzgerald, and one of those is a Southern Gothic story by William Faulkner. So it's very simple. Read the story, write the paragraph. All of this is in your paper packet. The period we're studying, and we talked about this before we started social distancing, is modernism. Roughly speaking, it's from 1917 to 1939. If this were a Brit-Lit class, we would be able to talk about Britain between the wars, because that's what they call it across the pond. The United States does not have that terminology, but really, that's what the modernist era is. 1917 is when the U.S. enters World War I. 1939 is the start of World War II in Europe. The time period in between is characterized by a couple of big gaps and dichotomies. One, there's a huge wealth gap during this time period. The rich are very, very rich, and the poor are very, very poor. 2, there's the stock market crash in 1929. So politically, the 1920s are very no holds barred. They're wild. They are Dionysian is probably not a word you know, but basically anything goes. The 1920s are one big party. And then the stock market crashes in 1929, and that ushers in the Great Depression, and the 1930s are basically one big national hangover. You can think of it that way. There's a huge shift in politics, in culture, in everything after the stock market crash. And you're going to see that in Babylon Revisited, because Fitzgerald writing before the stock market crash is The Great Gatsby. Fitzgerald writing after the stock market crash and writing about the period after the stock market crash is Babylon Revisited. So that'll give you a little insight into that story and kind of why he wrote it and what it means. Let's see what else about that time period. I have given you a handy-dandy timeline in your packet. I don't think that's something we necessarily need to go over, but it'll give you kind of a reference for some things that you can write about. During modernism, there's a lot of really bold experimentation, not just in literature, but in all the arts. You're going to see it in literature. We're going to look at some things like stream of consciousness, which is a completely different way of writing. And we're going to look at some poets who go way beyond the pale. But in all the arts and humanities, this is a period of great cultural change. Picasso is working during the modernist period, and then if you know anything about Picasso and the Cubism movement, it doesn't look like the representational art that people were used to at all. Jazz happens during this time period. In fact, a lot of cultural critics would say that jazz is the defining art form of modernism. And jazz is introducing new chords into the musical lexicon, doing things that have never been done in music before. And you're going to see that with the writers as well. But I have also given you in your packet a sidebar straight out of your textbook listing the elements of modernism. At some point in the future, there's going to be a 3.8 paragraph associated with that. You know it's coming. We've been doing it all year. But let me just run over the elements of modernism. You don't have to write any of this down because it's already written down for you. For one thing, there's an emphasis on bold experimentation, like we just talked about. And the rejection of sort of traditional themes and traditional subjects. So you don't see traditional romances during this time period, love stories and things like that. You don't see a lot of mainstream religious work during this time period. Those are very traditional themes and subjects. And you're going to see the rejection of traditional forms, like rhyming poetry, for instance. We don't have a lot of that in the modernist era. Poets are doing things radically different that have never been done before. You're also going to see reflected in this work the fragmentation of society. We talked about this before we started social distancing, that we're seeing a lot of new voices emerge. American culture is no longer thought of as monolithic or solid. You're going to see a sense of disillusionment and a loss of faith in all kinds of traditions, but especially in the American dream. And we saw that in The Great Gatsby. If you have finished the book, which you should have by now, you know Gatsby was Fitzgerald's symbol for the American dream. And basically he ends the American dream in The Great Gatsby ends up bleeding out in its glittering swimming pool. So that's a very good, clear example of how the American dream is being treated in literature during the modernist movement. You're going to see the rejection of sentimentality. Like I said, you're not going to see traditional love stories. You're going to see the rejection of artificiality, like rhyming poetry, very structured poems. You're also going to see a new kind of hero. And we've been kind of tracing, since Romanticism, we've been kind of tracing the American hero and how that character evolves. And I told you, those of you who chose Han Solo, for instance, for your romantic hero, that we would come to a point where we would come to a point in the semester where I thought you would see a place that's a more natural fit for him. You could make Han Solo a romantic hero, but really he's a modernist hero. The modernist hero is very flawed, very fallible. He's not necessarily a traditional good guy, but he is a stand-up guy. When push comes to shove, he shows a lot of grace under pressure. And that's really, Luke Skywalker is the romantic hero, really. Han Solo is this modernist hero, as is Gatsby. You're going to see an interest in the inner workings of the mind, and this is being driven a lot by Freud and psychoanalysis. But we're going to read some pieces in Stream of Consciousness, which is a style of writing that tries to mimic how the brain talks to itself. So just how your conscious brain works. And so you're going to see some other narrative techniques that attempt to do that too, because we have an interest in this time period in the way the mind works, the way it talks to itself. And last but not least, you're going to see many writers who believe that the modern era is, by its very nature, spiritually corrupted. So you're going to see a revolt against that debasement in a lot of the work of the modernists. And I think that about covers everything that I would have covered in class. It's been about 10 minutes. That's about as long as I ever lecture. The last thing I want to say is, one, I sure do miss you guys. And like I said, I'm going to try and keep everything on paper just as much as I can. And I don't want you to feel pressured to interact with me electronically if that's difficult for you. That said, if you need me, I am on all kinds of social media. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I do have a Twitter account, but I don't use it, so don't try to contact me there. I won't get it. I have Snapchat. I'm not as technologically ignorant as I seem like I am. And of course, I have school email. And if you want to do a Google Hangout or something like that, I am happy to meet up with you online. But I'm not going to create an environment where you feel pressured to do that. So, but if you want to do that, email me at my school email address, and we will set up a meeting. I can do Google Meetup, I think. I hope. I sure can try. If you want to talk to me in the simplest way possible, email me. I'll give you my telephone number, okay? Because I want you to know I'm here for you. If you are struggling during this time, not just with schoolwork. I mean, schoolwork is the least of our worries, really. But if you're struggling with schoolwork, by all means, contact me. I mean, I can help you with your Algebra 2. Now, I like to fail Algebra 2 myself. But I sure as shooting can find somebody who will. But more importantly, if you're just struggling with mental health, if you're scared, if you're depressed and anxious and you just need to talk, I will talk to you. If you're struggling with resources, if things are rough at home, you know where I am. Just drop me an email. We will find a way to get together because I got you back. And we will get through this. Just because we can't see the light at the end of the tunnel doesn't mean it's not there. We just haven't traveled far enough to see it. But we will. We're all going to see each other again. Everything is going to be okay. Well, I sure hope we do, because my cats are sick to death of hearing me talk about The Great Gatsby. And the problem is, I'm pretty sure they understand. They just don't care. You know where I am if you need me. Don't hesitate to get in touch. Take care now.